We've sped things up in the wrong direction. In 30 years, it's very possible that there won't be coral reefs.
So this is the Smartfin, and this is a project that you've been working on. This is fascinating.
It's a surfboard fin with sensors embedded in it, oceanographic sensors. And
Not a shark fin.
Not quite right.
Can we do something about it, or are we screwed?
A lot of people think it's sort of an all or nothing thing. Every single day that you bike to work instead of drive to work, all of that does actually matter. Knowing that this is going to impact us, our families, our children, and other communities without the resources.
You're signing up to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and that's kind of a movement.
And you can still have fun while doing it.
Yes,
exactly. That's life to the max.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Life to the Max here with Janna Breslin and Evan DeMarco. Oh, no, wait. I'm Evan DeMarco. You're Janna Breslin.
Hey, guys, welcome. And we're in our stomping grounds, or my stomping grounds today. We're in San Diego.
Yes.
La Jolla, to be exact.
So we are at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and I'm really excited about our guests. So, we really talk to so many people on the podcast in our video series who are making a big difference in the world. And when this guy first kind of came to our doorstep, I'm like, this is a dude we got to interview.
Yeah.
What you're going to see in the video content that we've shot so far is not only has he developed an incredible product, but he spent an hour surfing with us. No, he surfed. I don't know what we did.
I feel like I killed it today. So,
okay.
Yeah. I feel like I did pretty good.
All right, so we want to welcome to the show Phil Bresnahan. Did I say that right?
You got it.
All right, cool.
Awesome. Welcome.
Welcome.
It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. So who are you?
I'm a research engineer here at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is a department of UC San Diego. And in that role, I'm working on a couple different research projects for oceanography and conservation. And one of those projects is called the Smartfin. We're probably going to talk a lot about that, so I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I also manage the Sandbox Makerspace, which is a building with 3D printers, laser cutters, some test tanks, some other facilities.
And that's all the stuff behind us, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yep. And so we're teaching about 5 or so classes a quarter here with undergraduate and graduate students, and teaching them how to do hands-on machining, hands-on prototyping, so that they can actually learn not just what's happening in the textbook, but how to build the things to study those ecosystems and solve the problems.
That seems to be kind of a lost art, right? Like actual manufacturing, building things with your hands. That seems to be something that we've kind of gotten away from.
I think you're exactly right, and we've, I think, turned a corner, and we're coming back to it now with a vengeance almost, because all of this rapid prototyping technology is it's readily available. It's reasonably inexpensive. So I've seen kindergartens with some of this stuff, not quite the same as what we're looking at here in our lab, but rapid prototyping has really opened the door, sort of democratized the idea of making, where people are able to come into a facility and learn how to do some computer-aided design file really quickly, see it on the 3D printer in a couple hours. It's not like you have to learn how to run a lathe or a mill to actually hold something in your hands that you designed and you built. So I think this is really powerful.
So does this really kind of shorten the innovation curve when it comes to things that, whether it's oceanography, ocean preservation, or any kind of manufacturing technology?
It absolutely does. One of the mantras in the rapid prototyping world is fail fast. So learn really quickly what doesn't work. You can really quickly try new designs and find out what didn't quite work for you, but tweak it a little bit and keep iterating and figuring out what actually will work. And I think this rapid prototyping technology allows that in a way that if you had to send off your files to a professional shop, they might come back in a couple weeks, and then you might try it. It might have been really expensive also, so maybe you don't have the budget to make another 10 iterations of it. But in this case, we're able to kind of just keep spinning and see what does work a lot faster. So I think it really does open the doors for innovation.
Very cool. So let's back up a little bit. So you're a chemical engineer by trade?
That's right.
And so, give us a little bit of the journey of how you ended up here in La Jolla.
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in Pennsylvania and spent a lot of my summers in Ocean City, New Jersey. I was boogie boarding a ton and got into ocean kayaking a bit and just spending every minute I could out in the water. I ended up going to study chemical engineering because I really liked chemistry and math, and all of my high school teachers said, you should check out chemical engineering. But late in my undergraduate career, we went on this field trip to an oil refinery. And I remember walking around all day thinking like, yeah, this is impressive technology, but it doesn't feel quite right. And then at the end of the day, we walked into the manager's corner office, that quintessential corner office. And our professor opened the door and he said, look at this. This could be your view if you work up to the top of the ladder here. And I was like, is this guy trying to talk us all out of this? This is a horrible view. Just looking at, I mean, I rely on fossil fuels like anybody else, but I did not want that view. And, right around the same time, I took my first environmental science course, and I heard about what's called the Keeling curve, which incidentally came out of Scripps. So Charles David Keeling, a scientist here for several decades, began making the first atmospheric carbon dioxide measurements. And those measurements are made out in Hawaii, where the atmosphere is really well mixed. So you're seeing not just like the smog of LA, for example, but you're seeing this kind of average atmospheric condition. And he noticed over years that the CO2 level was actually increasing. We were able to measure this increase over time of atmospheric carbon dioxide. And of course, we know this really well now as climate change and global warming. But that the curve, the time series of CO2 increasing in the atmosphere is known as the Keeling curve. And when I saw that was kind of the first moment for me where I realized we are actually having a measurable impact on our planet. We can study this, we can see exactly what's happening, and we've known for over 100 years that CO2 is a heat-trapping gas. So I thought, I want to come out to Scripps and I want to study that, and I had this really naive view back then and probably still to a certain extent now, but I thought, we just need more data. We can convince Congress with more data about all of the carbon dioxide that we're putting in the atmosphere, and then a lot of that dissolves in the seawater as well, in the ocean. And I thought, we just need better sensors. And it wasn't very long before I realized it's not exactly just more data that we need. We need better stories and better ways of communicating this with the general population.
Well, I think that's kind of why we're sitting here. And I think that kind of brings us, I want to talk about that Keeling curve, right? Because it was recently that at that institute in Hawaii that we just found like the parts per million just reached the highest that it's ever been.
That's right.
And is this kind of the perceived, we're kind of like past the point of no return? We really want to talk about the environmental change and, can we do something about it or are we screwed?
Absolutely. Well, we've already committed ourselves to a certain amount of being screwed, to use your words there, which is really unfortunate. And I shouldn't even be laughing when I say that, because there have been hurricanes and typhoons and wildfires and things that have been exacerbated really, really severely because of climate change that's already occurred. But I don't like this idea of tipping point. There probably are some tipping points in the natural world where we're going to get past a point where we're just never going to be able to look back. But the way I like to look at it is every single incremental change we're able to make for the better is something that's actually going to have a meaningful impact and save some lives, whether they're penguins, dolphins, whales, or humans. Every single positive action we do is actually going to have a meaningful impact on the planet. So I like to think of it as, maybe we need to speed up our solution to this issue. We are definitely not reacting with the level of alarm that we really should. But I think that a lot of people think it's sort of an all or nothing thing. Like we either fix this, we go all solar, all wind power, all whatever, or business as usual and just kind of blow past all of these tipping points. But it's not so easy to say it's this dichotomy, I think. And so we have the chance to, even every single day that you bike to work instead of drive to work, or every day that you choose to bring your own bags instead of using some single-use plastic bag, all of that does actually matter. Even if you're only saving one life, that's kind of a big deal still.
Right.
Well, I think that's how we have to look at things, right? And this actually reminds me of a health class that I took, and they had this really kind of anecdotal template. It was like smoke a cigarette, take a day off your life, eat a Big Mac, take a day off your life, bike to work, put a day back on your life. And even though that's not truly accurate, if we start thinking in incremental, steps like that, it's you don't have to do it overnight.
That's right.
It's the small
Right.
shifts that equal big
And
changes.
we can all make smaller changes and steps to, accumulate more of a bigger change here. So
Agreed. Definitely.
So that kind of brings us a little bit to this guy.
Yeah.
Which this was the bearer of my bad surfing today to a certain extent.
I think it made my surfing better. So I'm just gonna put that out there.
Wait till you see her surfing, and then we'll have a social media sound off
It
on
was
that
great.
one. So this is the Smartfin, and this is a project that you've been working on. This is fascinating. I'm loving this. So tell us about the Smartfin.
I love it too, so I'm glad you do. The Smartfin is first and foremost what you're holding in your hands. It's a surfboard fin with sensors embedded in it, oceanographic sensors. And
Not a shark fin.
Not quite right. I thought I taught you better earlier. So what we're looking at here is this microcontroller and sort of computer that's controlling the entire device. It has a memory chip embedded in it. It has a rechargeable battery, motion sensor, GPS, and temperature sensor. And it also has a wet-dry sensor, so it's able to turn itself on and off when it goes in the water and then comes back out. And then one of the really exciting changes that we implemented recently was adding the cellular modem. So it is actually literally sending text messages to the cloud so that it is able to get all of the data off of the fin back to our servers, where we're able to see them in real time. And the advantage of that is that it takes the burden of uploading data out of the surfer's hands. So all they have to do is keep the fin charged and surf. And while they're surfing, all they have to do is keep the fin in the water enough so that it's collecting some data.
So that's awesome, right? And I think when we first heard this, I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. So
Yeah, I want to know more about this data.
you get the data, then what do you do with it?
Yeah, we're doing a ton of things with it. We're working on a couple different collaborations around the world right now. One of the most exciting is out of a group at the University of Exeter in England. Dr. Bob Bruin has been working with the Smartfin technology for the past couple of years. And before he was working with Smartfin, he was zip tying, strapping these temperature sensors to his surfboard leash and wearing a GPS unit in a fanny pack when he went out surfing. And he's this phenomenal satellite oceanographer. He's using satellite measurements to study coastal and open ocean ecosystems. And he found that the satellites don't do quite as well along the coast because there are a lot of interferences, I guess, that kind of confound the signal from the satellite. And so he wanted to go out with his fanny pack and his zip-tied sensor to see what kind of data he could collect to correct the satellite measurements. And around the same time, Smartfin was coming out, and he found that this was just a much easier way to collect even better data. It turns
Much
out,
sexier package here too, I do have to say.
I don't know, the fanny pack's coming back.
I do have to agree. I do wear those on my dog walks
Yeah,
now
yeah.
and then. So
But I'm glad you agree. I mean, this is a pretty reasonably sleek technology, and it allows the surfer to just take out whatever surfboard fin they have. It's like a 2-minute process to take their fin out, if even that. You unscrew your fin, you put this back in, and then you go surf, and that's kind of all there is to it. And so this one application is just to improve coastal data collection efforts in a way that we're able to improve satellite measurements so that we can sort of apply these better calibration data to those data sets. Another really exciting application is out of a group in Australia that's looking at marine ecosystem models. They're trying to understand how marine organisms, things like whales, dolphins, are interacting with changing temperature patterns in the surface ocean. And what they discovered was that they didn't have quite enough high-resolution data to put into the model. So they're trying to apply all of this, input all of this interesting data, which gives some really interesting output, but they started scratching their heads and saying, we still can't quite see what's happening between here and here because maybe there are sensors that are a kilometer apart or 100 kilometers apart, whereas you can take one of these out and you can make measurements every meter. That higher resolution temperature data can really fill in some of those gaps and help us understand what's happening out there at really fine spatial scales, which matter. The fine spatial scales are the scales that we interact with. We don't interact with the 100 scale phenomena, 100 meter phenomena. We interact with the water right in front of us, right?
Well, and I think what we're looking at behind you is the Smartfin app. This is the web-based portal, right?
That's right.
And so we can see all of the data that you've collected over an extended period of time, and there's a ton of it there.
Yeah, we've been out in the water for a little over 3 years now, which is really cool to see. And we're on. We've gone through a couple different iterations of the technology. A previous version had a Bluetooth modem, so that surfers would upload the data through a custom app after the session. And so that's been out. We distributed 300 of those over the first couple of years, largely to some collaborators at the Surfrider Foundation and their members. And so they got in the water. They collected the data. One of the really exciting things about this project is that it's not just scientists collecting the data, it's everyone surfing who wants to use one of these things.
That is so cool. So, this becomes actionable for the average person who's not an oceanographer, not a climate scientist. It's, I want to surf.
But they can still gather that data to give to you guys to make a bigger change. So that is really fun. And this is, they can just surf. All they do is just get fun with it, right? And so they don't have to do anything specific. That's so fun.
Crowdsource data.
Yep.
So we collect all of this data, and you guys start to have a much more, a scope-locked model that you can, with all of these data points. And then what's kind of the end game for this? Outside of the fin, where does this data bring you in 2, 3, 4 years?
Well, I can answer the data question in a moment, but I want to touch on where I think it really goes before we even have to deal with the data at all. The place where I think we have the most impact or most potential impact is through storytelling and through communicating the science that we're doing, and perhaps even more importantly, the science that we've already done, that the community has already done around climate change and around oceanography and the things that we know are happening to the planet, but that we historically as scientists haven't been great at getting out into the general public, just because we're often so caught up in the small uncertainties in our measurements, and we get worried about these, like fifth decimal place inaccuracies that we end up spending a ton of time in the lab trying to deal with. And then when we try to communicate that to the general population, it will often sound like we're not even sure what we're talking about, right? And so I think a tool like this allows us to enter a different type of conversation and go to bars and talk to people about climate science and have conversations like this. And just out in the water, I can't tell you how many times now I've had conversations in the parking lot after a surf session about climate change because someone saw a blinking LED on my surfboard fin.
Like, what's that?
Yeah, and they have no idea I'm making measurements. They're not even trying to necessarily find anything out about chemical oceanography, but they see this little LED lighting up. And I don't want to say that the LED is the only important thing on there, but it's a really cool way to start talking about both the science that we're doing as well as the science that has come before us and is happening in the world around us. So we're collecting data from currently 300 fins. We're going through a manufacturing process right now where we're making another 1,000 fins to distribute in 2020, which is amazing. It's going to be 1,000 of this design, some modifications to this design so that we can mass produce it. And with those 1,300 fins out in the water, we're going to have this really fine resolution data everywhere that people surf. And we're going to enable communities that maybe can't afford the extremely expensive. Some oceanographic technologies can be really, really expensive. And so there are a lot of communities that would love to be monitoring their local surf break for the sake of understanding what's happening to their home ecosystem, but they might not have the resources to do that. And I think that this is a really neat way to bridge that gap a little bit and put a tool in people's hands that generally the surf community is really passionate about ocean conservation. I think that's a fairly fair stereotype to make. And so people want a way to get out there and give back a little bit. And we think that this is a really good on-ramp to do that. But then once we have all of those data, we're going to be able to fill in gaps between all of the sensors that we have out there, these expensive technologies, and those are indeed the state-of-the-art technologies. We're not trying to replace the pier-based monitoring stations or the satellite technologies, but we're trying to add to that. We think that we can really fill in some of the gaps there and learn what's happening at these smaller spatial scales. I guess I can't say enough how much I think is happening in these small spatial scales that we're not even really fully aware of as a community. People always ask me this question of what have you learned from the data? What are you going to learn from the data? And I think that one of the most exciting things in all of science, not just oceanography or surfboard-based oceanography, is trying to build a tool that is going to fill in some gaps, even though you don't know what you're going to learn from seeing those those gaps filled in. I think there's a lot of sort of prospecting in oceanography, a lot of exploratory science, and that's the foundation of all natural science. It's exploration, and that's what really hooked me and got me into this field in the first place.
So does this data on a long enough timeline allow you guys to make predictive models? And I hate to say it, but I'm thinking of that really, really spot-on scientific movie, The Day After Tomorrow. And I'm sure as a scientist, but if we start to see, these systemic, temperature increases, I mean, we obviously know that that's going to have an impact, an increase in hurricane, not only frequency, but strength, typhoons, all of these things. But can this data ultimately lead to some very important predictive models for what's happening in our oceans?
I certainly hope so. I think that that getting back to this idea of filling in the gaps, we have a really good understanding of global scale weather patterns and global climate as we understand the changes are currently happening. But what we don't understand in many cases is if we see this big storm coming, is it going to flood in Imperial Beach or Mission Beach or La Jolla or Del Mar or so on? We don't always have the super fine resolution data to be able to tell us maybe in Imperial Beach it's not going to be this block, but it's going to be a little bit further north, for example. It's these low-lying areas where I think we just need more and more data. And these smart fins have motion sensors on them, which we're starting to use. I'm working on a collaboration with a master's student in the computer science department here at UCSD, who is working on machine learning approaches to understand how to take the motion sensor data and generate these wave statistical models from that data. Because the motion sensor is sensing when the board is going up and down.
Oh, wow.
And when you're just sitting out there waiting for a wave, you're just following the ocean surface, and you're literally a wave buoy at that time. And so her whole master's and some previous work she's done has led to the ability to start using this technology to measure waves. And I think to your point of predictive modeling, we might be able to help improve some of the models of flooding, for example, or small-scale temperature changes in a way that we just hadn't in the past.
Which could, because of the temperature change, feed or determine the trajectory of a hurricane, right?
Absolutely.
In theory.
Absolutely. In theory, yep.
You're following
Yep.
the warmest water, which is going to give it more power kind of concept.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
Cool. So let's talk about the commercialization of this. So you guys are launching another 1,000 in 2020. So what if one of our listeners wants to buy one of these?
Smartfin.org/contact is the best way to get in touch and find out what we're doing, what our progress is, stay up to date with the latest versions of the technology. We plan to release the big batch of these, the first of the 1,000 of the next fins, probably mid-2020, I think. And so smartfin.org/contact will give people the access to the mailing list to sign up to find out when those are actually coming out, and then ultimately buy them. And I think we're going to have a web store so that people can come and actually click the box and purchase one, have it delivered to them. And the idea is we're going to go with sort of a subscription model or a membership-based model so that people know that they're sort of joining a club. They're not just buying a future paperweight. They're because we want to take a bit of a step back, I guess. One of the issues that we have in any kind of conservation-related science, and especially climate science, is when you spend your entire career studying the problems that result from the excesses that we've gotten really accustomed to having in our lives, creating another product to solve that is this conundrum. It's really it's tough to think well, this one's actually going to solve it, so therefore it's fine to produce. So, so I don't really like that attitude, and what I do like is the idea that people are joining this organization, and they're joining not just to collect data, but to actually become the next group of spokespeople for Smartfin, and the next spokespeople for climate science as a whole. That's sort of a long-winded way of getting to your point of how do they get one, but they're going to be signing up for what we hope is an on-ramp into the field of climate communication.
Well, that's what it takes, right? It's a movement. It's not just buy a product.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that we've ever really advocated anything like that, but this is why this technology, I think, is so appealing to us and to our listeners is you're not just buying something. It's it's not a paperweight. It is you're signing up to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and that's kind of a movement.
Yep.
And you can still have fun while doing it.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
life to the max.
Exactly.
To the max. Exactly.
Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, that's for me. Obviously, that's probably the coolest part of the project. It's not like we're asking people to go out and collect water samples and go through this whole laboratory analysis approach. We do think that there are other citizen science movements that do ask that, and those are awesome. This might be a first step toward that, and so this is a really easy way to just keep doing exactly what you're doing. Just keep surfing, keep the fin charged, and have fun while you're doing it. And then maybe you see this on-ramp into citizen science and climate change communication and so on, and you see all of the other exciting projects that are happening out there, and you do want to get a little more invested. But you're right, fun is the most important part here.
And the idea is to get anyone who wants to get one is for them to use it as long as they possibly can. As long as you're surfing, use this fin.
Exactly.
Okay,
exactly.
cool.
Yep. And
Awesome.
and know that we have an eye on you. We know how much data you're collecting for us. No, I don't mean to sound that. That's like way creepier than I want.
Yeah. Not as Big Brother as it sounds.
It's all anonymous. I should add that we have anonymized serial numbers. So
Cool.
Except, maybe that's actually a great call to action, right? Is send a text message or an email, be like, "Hey, we noticed you haven't surfed in a couple weeks.
Right.
Everything okay?"
Right.
definitely.
You need some water therapy. Get back in there.
Exactly.
That's awesome. I
So
love it.
you're working with all of these things that are really kind of core to what it is that we talk about, ocean conservation. How do we fix the planet? How do we take these small steps to equal big changes? So one of the questions we love to ask our guests is if I give you a magic wand and you could do anything with it, what's your one wish right now?
Oh my gosh. Wow. I guess I would probably just start with I would use my magic wands to have the general population believe scientists. I think
Over politicians?
over web bloggy weirdness, over politicians, over pseudoscientists, over people who are funded by these political movements or whatever movement. I think it's almost really funny when every once in a while you'll hear of this really famous climate scientist be accused of taking money for whatever they're promoting in the climate science business, and people will use that as a common this myth, this misconception that we hear all the time. And it's like, there is no climate scientist who is doing, standard academic research who's getting rich off of that. So it's a really funny criticism in my opinion. But I guess, it's just if people actually believed that scientists were doing this because we're passionate about understanding the planet, understanding human health and human interactions with the planet and the planetary health, I think that would be a really cool first step towards solving a lot of problems, because I have no political agenda. I'm just curious about what's happening with the planet, and I want to save that, and I don't care what side of the aisle is going to get behind that. I just want to do it, and I think a lot of people have a lot of interest in doing that, and so if people believe scientists, that'd be a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, that would be a cool thing.
It would.
We've come a long way, not in a positive way, from 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Yeah,
just science used to rule the world, and now it's blogs.
It's a lot of blogs. Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of information out there, just everywhere.
There's a lot of disinformation out there.
Right. I'm just saying information from everyone of all angle, and it's just, it's hard to read something, know if it's true or not. And I mean, so you have a point there. You guys do the work because you're passionate about it and you have a strong drive behind. And so that's where I think a lot of the truth lies, right?
Yep.
Is there. So
absolutely. And
it's a good point.
Can I steal a second magic wand?
Oh, by all means.
Your response made me think of another point to this, which is the second magic wand would be used to have to give everyone the ability to spot disinformation. If people actually knew how to discern the good information from the bad or the false, that would be this amazing skill, and people.
That would be an amazing skill.
People, the blessing of the internet is that we can get the good news out there, and we can tell people what we're learning really, really quickly, and we can build off of scientific progress really quickly. But of course, the bad is that you can find anything you want out there, anything, and you can like click twice in the wrong direction and you find yourself down this weird rabbit hole and you're like, oh my gosh, this is just crazy. But but it can be really well written sometimes and really believable, even if it has no underpinning in science.
That's a great point.
From a scientific perspective, what's the greatest threat to our oceans right now?
It's definitely carbon dioxide. I say definitely, in my opinion. You ask 1,000 climate scientists or oceanographers, and I bet you get 1,000 different answers. But I've studied carbon dioxide for the last 10 years, and I think that it's just having so many different various impacts from in the atmosphere. It's causing global warming, and that's ultimately 90% of the heat that is trapped by the Earth's ecosystem, the Earth as a whole, due to anthropogenic or human-caused global warming, ends up in the ocean. So the ocean is trapping most of the heat that we're causing to be trapped here. And so the ocean is warming slowly but steadily. So that's one effect. But then we have the direct impact of carbon dioxide plus H2O. Water is carbonic acid, so we're making the water more acidic by putting more carbon dioxide into the water. And we know that this has a really harmful effect on shell-forming organisms, things like corals, things like some shellfish, like oysters, for example. There have been many studies already that have shown this impact. And so carbon dioxide is just causing all of these different sort of ripple effects, if you will. And it's not just the global warming, it's not just the ocean acidification, but it's the combination of all of these that's really it's gonna be hard to combat. It is hard to combat, and it's gonna be hard to rebound from.
Well, I was just going to ask, do you think it's becoming increasingly more and more? And I mean, everything's getting warmer faster, or is it more of a slow and steady thing, but it's happening?
We've sped things up in the wrong direction, unfortunately. We are extremely efficient at extracting fossil fuels from the Earth, and that's carbon. That's carbon that has been stored for millions to hundreds of millions of years, and we're able to put it in the atmosphere in minutes. It's just incredible how good we are at extracting this old carbon and putting it in the atmosphere, where it's not helping anything. It's just only harmful.
Well, that's kind of my next question, I guess, is, if we don't change anything, in 10 years, and 20 years, and 50 or 100 years, I mean, if nothing changes, what does our world look like then? How do our oceans look? Do we even have sea life anymore? I know like our corals are dying and there's a lot of changes already happening, but I mean, I don't know what your opinion is, or what you see happening in the future, but if you could shed some light on that, and kind of curious what you think what would be happening in the next 100 years maybe if nothing changes.
Yeah. Well, I guess I have even fewer crystal balls than I have magic wands, but the best that I can do to predict that is say we already have watched the vast majority of our coral reefs start to die off. And that's crazy. The majority, over 50%. That's not like we've started to notice this thing over here in this one weird case. It's the majority. I mean, the Caribbean reefs are just totally decimated at this point. Indonesian and Central Pacific.
Isn't the Great Barrier Reef considered dead?
The Great Barrier Reef is actually, it's bleached a couple times, but bleaching doesn't always lead to complete die-off. So sometimes it's able to bounce back from that and regenerate. The bleaching effect is temperature related. And so when it gets too hot, the coral animal will expel the algae, which is what gives the coral its color. But sometimes those algae will come back, and that symbiotic relationship will proceed and things will be okay. But sometimes it doesn't. And a lot of times, a lot of the Great Barrier Reef has died off. Overall, it seems like that's one reasonably resilient ecosystem, but it's not going to last. And to project 10, 20 years out, I think I heard one of the most respected climate scientists who focuses on reefs recently, Ayanna Johnson. She gave a TED Talk recently where she was talking about how in 30 years, it's very possible that there won't be coral reefs, at least not as we know them. Coral reefs already are just disappearing pretty quickly. So I think that's one thing that's going to happen really fast. Another thing that we're already seeing is these massive flood events, hurricanes, typhoons, and so on, that we know the storms themselves are exacerbated by the excess heat in the ocean. But then we also have a higher sea level. And so flood events are just really, really rare. There's this idea in kind of climate science or meteorology of the 100-year storm. On average, we should see one of these events every 100 years, right? And it's a reasonably simple concept. If the climate system is staying relatively static, meaning we're not really changing all that much. There are seasons always, of course. There are going to be different storms with different extremities and so on. But the thing with climate change is that we're literally loading the dice. We're changing the frequency of some of these events. And so sea level rise is pushing up where the water line is starting, and then we have stronger storm events, and this is all just leading to more and more inundation, more coastal flooding, more events that can take out structures and lives. And one of the really scary things about this is that it hits a lot of communities that don't have the resources to handle this. So I think one of the biggest issues we have in climate science and some of this conversation around what's going to happen and what is happening is that people read about some of this stuff or see it on the evening news, and it always feels really distant because most people that we interact with, I imagine, have the resources to escape these hurricanes when they come. They have enough warning. They're able to get out of harm's way, but a lot of people don't have those resources, and a lot of people are kind of on these either low-lying islands or less wealthy areas where they just aren't able to get themselves out of the way. They're not able to build structures to protect themselves. And so this turns into a really kind of moral and ethical dilemma where we need to be thinking not just how is this going to impact me, but how is this going to impact the rest of the planet, the rest of humanity that we care about. I think there's this really strong moral argument if you care about humanity as a whole and trying to look out for someone without the same resources as you, that should be a huge impetus, I think, for a lot of people to do something.
So let's assume that the bulk of people actually have that kind of general care for humanity and want to see good things. What are the biggest things that people can do? Because
I was just about to ask. Yeah, what can we do?
We hear about the potential, right? Don't buy property in Miami right now is kind of what I've heard. But what can we do? What are the top 3 things that the average person can do to make an impact today?
Yeah. Well, once again, I think that if you ask 100 or 1,000 scientists that
different
question,
opinions everywhere.
Totally different opinions. I'm going to say one of the first things you can do is vote and really take this stuff into consideration. I think that people will hear about this stuff in the news, they'll hear about it on this podcast, and they'll think like, yeah, that sounds kind of scary, but maybe it doesn't sound quite as meaningful for a major life decision as some other priorities that are discussed in the political ecosystem. So I think voting with this, knowing that this is going to impact us, our families, our children, and other communities without the resources to deal with it, and making decisions based off of that is, in my opinion, the number one thing. The second thing is thinking constantly about how your actions are actually tied to some planetary impact, and whether that's using reusable water bottles so that we can reduce the plastic that's flowing out into the ocean, or biking to work, or even surfing is actually a really great example because you're going to power off your computer, you're going to use less fossil fuel unless you jump in some giant SUV and drive 100 miles to get to the water. But if you have access to natural resources outside, step outside, spend time just enjoying the planet for what it is, regardless of where you live, whether it's surfing or taking an urban hike or whatever.
Right.
We're still quite lucky to have great access to great resources in a lot of areas. And so number 2 is I'm gonna re-summarize that as play. Just play outside.
All right.
Okay, cool. I like it.
That's number 2. And then you asked for 3. Let's come back to that.
Okay.
Do you really need that straw? No, right?
Yeah, that's a bit. Well, I hate straws.
Well, even when you order takeout, wherever they throw in like plastic stuff, and if you just take it home, like, are you gonna choose your metal utensil or the plastic? You're probably gonna choose the metal because it's like nicer to eat with or whatever. But even with like the plastic, I never throw those away. Like I never try and just throw things away. If it's given to me and it's now in my hands, I'll try and use it. Sometimes I'll wash a plastic fork. I'll throw it in the dishwasher because
Same.
why not? I think about that too, but I think it's little things like that where be mindful about where your stuff's going and what you're consuming, what you're buying, and how much you're throwing away.
Absolutely.
I even think about Amazon and like ordering packages and stuff. I don't know. I try really hard to bundle everything together, and sometimes you order a few things throughout the week or whatever, and it comes in different packages, and I feel guilty about that now. I try, but I think about that. I mean, we're using these massive trucks to haul around all these packages too. There's all this cardboard everywhere now and tape and shit like that. So excuse me, but anyway, yeah.
We've already lost our PG rating. So go for it. But actually, that's a nice segue, because I remember like one of the top like engagement posts I've ever had was it's a man like choking a woman, and it says you might like to be choked, but sea turtles don't. So keep your effing plastic out of the oceans. Yeah. And it was like, I mean, it actually got so much engagement. You're right, like people clearly understand that we've got a problem, right? And they'll actually, whether you have to put it in that kind of context, they'll at least recognize that that's an issue. And so I think one of the big issues, though, is we've never really been given the tools to fix it. Mm-hmm. We can talk about the problems, but the solutions are like, okay, well, we've gotten rid of the plastic bags in California with the plastic bag ban. We're seeing more Teslas on the road, but how many of those are actually fossil fuel driven simply because you're plugging that into an electrical outlet?
I was actually about to ask about electric cars and your opinion on that. I have a Tesla, so I feel like, okay, cool. So you're like, more.
Do it.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Sweet.
Yeah, that's huge. Getting away from fossil fuels, I think, so even as you say, if you're plugging that into the wall and the electricity is coming from a coal-fired power plant, then yes, of course, you're still polluting the atmosphere through doing that. But the really important thing in switching our entire kind of infrastructure over to renewable resources is that we have to take these steps along the way so that we're there. Like we can't just all of a sudden wake up one day and have only solar and wind generated power, but we're all still driving these gas fueled cars, right? So if we start making these switches there, and then the next switch is to have better power storage so that when we do get a lot of wind power or a lot of solar power, we're able to store that on the grid somewhere where it's accessible. So that
we don't have that infrastructure now, correct?
We don't have all of the infrastructure, but we have way more infrastructure than some people might give us credit for, I guess. Like some people use it as an excuse not to do the thing that is actually better for the planet. But we do, especially in California, we're really, really lucky to have charging stations all over the place. I even recently moved, and we called ahead of time to ask if this new apartment complex that we were looking at had charging stations for electric vehicles, and the person said no, and we were kind of disappointed and thought, well, we'll still check it out anyway. But they were there when we showed up, and they hadn't even learned that they just got this new infrastructure.
But just like what you said, we can ask these questions and kind of probe companies or apartment buildings or whatever, and make that known that that's something that the community or like the public is looking for these days.
Absolutely.
So that's such a great point.
That's my number 3 actually. I like this. Talking about it, talking about climate change and talking about the solutions are ways that we're going to be able to really change the way that we're moving the planet right now.
Yeah.
Talking about it with friends, talking about it with leasing offices, talking about it with Amazon, and say to some supplier maybe like, why do you use this ridiculous amount of plastic in your packaging? If you tweet something like that, if you post something like that on Instagram, that's going to get so much more weight behind it, and other people retweeting, reposting, whatnot. That's gonna have this really nice ripple effect as well. So we as consumers need to be talking to the providers of what we've gotten used to. Going back to the Amazon thing again, another really weird thing that we've done in our economy is we've gotten so used to convenience and having things delivered whenever, wherever we need them. So like next day delivery means that something's getting on a plane out of wherever, maybe China, maybe the middle of the US, maybe not all that far away, but it's probably getting on a plane, and then it's getting on a truck, and then it's getting into another truck just to get to you by the next day. And that's way less efficient than if we were just like, hey, it's okay, I'll get this in a couple weeks, when it's coming with this bigger shipment that was really well coordinated, much more efficient.
Immediate gratification is.
Exactly.
Well, it's so interesting because I think as a whole, we're more conscious about, not using plastic as much, bringing your own bags to the grocery store. Like, I feel like as a whole, people are more conscious, but funny enough, it's like still things are getting worse, and it's stuff like that where it's like just like what you said, the plane now leaves earlier or like more because there's more packages, and it's this whole instant gratification thing.
Definitely.
So it's this balance here of people being more conscious, but also our developing world is just more instant like that. And it almost doesn't weigh out anymore.
And you're going to find something out
definitely.
pretty soon, and I hope I'm not telling tales outside of school, and we can edit this out. But it sounds like, well, you're going to be a father soon.
That's right.
Yes, congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
And what you're going to find out is that kids' toys packaging, like whoever developed that needs to be shot. I mean, like it is more, like they do it because people steal a lot of this stuff. But I mean, when you go to open a kid's toy, you need like a Swiss Army knife, a machete, and 3 other people to
and
help
you still cut your fingers off.
Oh, look at that! I literally did that.
Yeah.
But it's just a
Right.
waste. But the interesting thing is that I've heard that as we've become more and more e-commerce and less retail based, is that some of those things are changing because the security implementation necessary to get that Disney toy on the shelf and make sure that it doesn't get lost or stolen now doesn't need to be there anymore. So there's kind of this interesting thing where it's not always black and white, but I think this really opens up this dialogue, which is what we want to do all the time, is like, how do we really impact this? It's to call Disney and say, way too much freaking plastic on this thing, and I cut my finger.
Yeah. And there's a second part too, and I should first say that I very much plan to be buying all sorts of things. I'm definitely part of the consumerist nation with the rest of us here. But the second part is we don't always need the new thing. Like we have neighbors, we have friends. Maybe something has some like little gray mark on it because someone already kicked it once and it has some smudge. But like
Right.
that's the other big thing. Even more important than calling Disney is just not buying the thing
Right.
that's packaged
It's
with
so
all
true.
that, right? And nothing against Disney. I'm sure I'm going to be buying a million Disney products.
Oh, you
right?
will.
Like I'm going to be in it with everyone. But yeah, I think that we really need to vote with our wallets in this way.
Right,
as
taking
well.
action ourselves. Even I go to Costco, and I like to buy a lot of organic foods and stuff like that. And I was talking to one of the workers there, and I said, "Look, I'm so impressed because you guys have so much organic foods now, and there's so many healthy, non-GMO, gluten-free, whatever products you have. It's so exciting." They're like, "Yeah, it's just because that's what people have been asking us." And
Definitely.
it's like, a lot of people think, oh, it's just me. What could I do? It's just, I'm just one person.
How does that work? Do you buy like
definitely.
7,000 organic bananas at a time?
Sometimes.
That's a lot of bananas.
There's a lot of bananas.
I'm just
Like, do you have to freeze them? How does that work?
I know, it's just me. So I like broccoli, okay?
That's a lot of broccoli.
You do you.
Anyway, yeah, so
And lots of you.
what I'm trying to say is, like, as a whole, we can all make a difference by all doing action, basically,
right.
all having action.
Yeah,
and
I
making
think
that a thing.
kind of another part to that is that we often think like, well, I have all this other plastic. It's not really going to matter if I get this one plastic thing or whatever. But you were talking about the Instagram post that the choking thing earlier. I think we're now at a point where you can almost look at every single piece of plastic packaging and know some of it's going to be recycled, but a lot of that's still going to end up in the ocean or in some waterway or some part of the natural ecosystem. And that could kill an animal. So like every single thing you look at, it's not like because I personally used 1,000 single-use forks over the year. It's more because like every single decision leads up to it. So it's back to this incremental thing that we've been talking about a lot.
Well, the sea life will eat it,
Right.
and we eat the sea life. We are literally killing ourselves. We're poisoning ourselves with our own plastic. So I feel you. I am passionate about that part.
No,
So-
and-
Good, thanks.
But
Yeah.
this is
On
back
behalf of the turtles, thank you.
and this just comes back to the this idea that, well, we've been doing it for this long forever, so what's one more?
Yep.
And that's the mentality that has to stop is the one more. At some point, there's the straw that breaks the camel's back.
I think you're right. Yep.
And
we're gonna wish we did something sooner. And so why?
I think
even?
we're already there, and that's why we're
True.
We're talking to Phil.
I know. Yeah. I mean, this is great conversation. I think this is fantastic. Lots of good information, though. A lot of things I also didn't know about all this. I'm glad that I was able to learn some things as well. So hopefully our listeners will be able to.
Awesome.
So Phil, we want our people to follow you, what it is that you're doing. How can our listeners really get involved? We'll put the website, the Smartfin website, in the show notes. But is there any give our people that call to action, like go out and do this, and how do people follow you and make sure that they're getting the best information possible to do exactly what you said, is vote properly, make the best decisions when it comes to their environment and their health?
Sure. Well, the first and I think easiest thing for a lot of people to do would be to follow Scripps Ocean on social media. We have some fantastic tweeting and Instagram posting and Facebook messaging now. Probably some other educational content. I mean, it's not just like the fun fact of the day. There is some of that, but it's like the cutting edge discoveries that people here at Scripps are learning. I think there's some really, really great content. And there's some other fantastic conservation organizations and science organizations out there that are doing this as well. So I think that's a really great first step toward just seeing more of what's happening out there. And then the other call to action is what I said earlier. It's get outside, spend more time in the natural environment. I mean, it's good for everything. So like, there's just no downside to this, right? I think, of course, I'm quite fortunate to be here at Scripps Oceanography and have the ocean at my doorstep. But
right.
You know, like your view is horrible. Like,
I'm a
we
little biased
live in
on
a good
this.
place.
Yes,
Very
we do.
good place.
like, what did you do on your lunch? Well, I went to McDonald's. What did you do on your lunch? I went surfing.
Right.
I didn't actually go to McDonald's, but
Yeah.
that's great advice. Yeah.
But I did actually go surfing.
Yeah,
We did.
that's awesome. Which you guys are going to see if you're not watching, through the B-roll right now.
Yeah.
No, you're going to see him surf, and you're going to see us too.
Like I said, I did really good. I was proud of myself. Yeah.
You both crushed it.
Yeah.
Laird will be proud.
He would be very proud.
We're going to get one of these to Laird.
I know, right?
I
Oh,
hope
he'd
so.
be stoked. That'd be awesome.
We'll definitely do that.
So good.
Do you have any other questions?
No, Phil, thank you so much. This has been really great, and thank you for being here with us and sharing all your messages, and this is fantastic. So
Thank you, Jenna.
Yeah.
It's been a great
Thank
opportunity.
you.
Thanks, Evan.
No, thank you.
Absolutely love talking about this stuff and really
Yeah.
glad that you're making it a priority as well to get the word out about what we're doing as scientists, conservationists. It's all really helpful.
it's needed.
So I think our goal then is 3 years from now, we want to come back and interview you so that we can look at that map and see all of the different dots that.
That'd be cool. Yeah. All the dots.
Yeah.
Let's not wait 3 years. We'll get a whole lot of dots in the next year.
Okay, so we'll be back in a year.
See you in a year.
And yeah, same time next year. Hopefully our surfing is a little bit better.
Mine too. Yeah.
Yeah. After the
That's
surgery.
right. I'll have it all stitched up and I'll be back in business.
Cool.
It'll be good soon.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank
Awesome.
you for tuning in to another episode of Life to the Max podcast with Janna Bresnahan.
And Evan
DeMarco.
DeMarco. Am I supposed to say that? Okay, bye. Evan DeMarco. We're still trying to work this out.
You'll get it. It'll come. Don't worry.
Remember say goodnight, Gracie?
No.
No, you're way too young for
Yeah.
that. I just dated myself. Make sure to follow us on iTunes or whatever platform you listen to your podcasts on. Please write a review, share this with friends and family. This is an incredible message. We were fortunate enough to have Phil. I was going to botch it, so. Bresnahan. She did this. She screwed me up with her name. Phil Bresnahan. We'll put all of his information on the show notes. Smartfin.org.
That's right.
And check out this incredible technology. Make sure to share this one. Make sure to share this message. This is an important one, and your life might just depend on it.
Thank you, guys.
See you next time.